Good morning. Good morning and welcome. And I would love to say thank you for joining us this morning. I'm so excited about what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be having a discussion on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and all the different places that we can take that discussion. So I'm just thrilled to be here. My name is Camunez, and I am the 2021 chair of the Denver Metro Association of Realtors Community Alliance Committee. I'm honored to be here. I'm also a member, board of director member for ARIA and past vice president for NAREP. So again, I'm thrilled to be here. And I want to start off our conversation today by introducing one of our industry partners who's very important to us. We love our industry partners. And today I'm so honored to introduce Ashley Moore, who's with Chase Bank. And I'm going to turn it over to Ashley and tell us what you're doing, Ashley.
Thanks so much, Derek. I am so excited to be a part of this conversation that is very much needed in the community, and I'm so thankful to be a part of that. As Derek mentioned, I am Ashley Moore. I am the Affordable Lending Relationship Manager for the Greater West, so I cover a few different territories, and I want to talk to you all a little bit about what we're doing at the firm that strategizes with our community and affordable lending. As you all may know, we have a $30 billion commitment to increase racial equity, but it's not just about the commitment. It really starts from within. And it starts from the people. We're going to be hiring a diverse team that's going to mimic the markets that they serve. But more importantly, it's not necessarily just how they look or how they identify. We also need a diversity of thought within those team members. We really want to ensure that we can be innovative as we move throughout new counties and countries or new states throughout the United States. But it doesn't just start with the new ones. It also is going to infect with our old ones. We have been increasing and changing the way we have our training through diversity and inclusion so that we can really speak to those truths. We need to be present. We need to continue to build trust in the community or even rebuild the trust in community and being present digitally and in person. And so that's why we are hiring community managers, community home lending advisors to really focus on those that are right within the community, whether it be for small business, just banking for the underbanked and the unbanked, or home lending strategies. We are truly here to be within the community. But partnering with you, partnering with local leaders, and really understanding how we can build that trust in Black and Brown communities. And working with those with boots on the ground, you're going to know the ins and outs of what's needed and to overcome the barriers of home ownership. And together, we can create a solution. Today, we've expanded our low down payment loan programs. And starting really soon, we're going to be doubling our grant to $5,000 in select census tracts. We've improved our FHA pricing across the United States. We're also going to be removing some Chase overlays so we can reach more clients. But last but not least, we need to increase our efforts at a regional level, a national level, and a local level, and to make sure that we are working together with the community to build sustainable home ownership. I'm so excited to be a part of this company. We truly are putting our heart on our sleeves, and we are doing everything that we can to increase that racial equity. So I'll turn it back over to you, Derek. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. That is truly exciting. And it's wonderful to see that Chase is stepping up and doing those amazing things to help the community. So thank you. Ashley's going to be sticking around and she's going to be fielding questions for us today. So if you do have a question, by all means, down in the Q&A box at the very bottom, go ahead and type those in. And like I say, Ashley will be presenting those questions to our panelists as we go through the morning here. I am thrilled beyond words to introduce our panelists this morning. Just amazing what these three have accomplished and been able to do and where they're taking us on so many different levels. As I was saying this morning to each of them, their bios are just incredible and it's hard to pick and choose what to mention about them. So I'm going to have them introduce themselves. This morning we have Tariana Navas-Nieves. We have Ashley Moore, we already introduced, we met Ashley already, Nita MosbyTyler, and then Milford Adams, as many of you already know. So I'm going to start it off with Nita. And Nita, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much, Derek, and thank you so much to the panel and all of you that have joined. I'm Nita MosbyTyler, and I am the chief catalyst of an organization based in Denver, Colorado, called the Equity Project. The organization was designed by me 4.5 years ago as a consulting firm to help other organizations advance their systems of equity, inclusion, and diversity. My background is human resources. I've spent 30 years, I started when I was 3, in HR, working for all kinds of organizations across the country, all kinds of sectors. It was in 2016, if I can just share with you really quickly. It was the presidential election happening, where I began to see our country in particular polarizing yet again around really difficult topics like race. I saw it happening in communities nationally, but I also started to even see that polarization happen in the workplace. And it really was in that moment in 2016 that I decided to make the biggest decision I've ever made in my life. And that was to give up the role that I was in, which was a great one. It was the Senior Vice President of HR and Chief Inclusion Officer at Children's Hospital, Colorado, to start this firm called the Equity Project to talk about this difficult topic in a way that maybe we were not talking about it in the past. And that's what brings me to you today. So I am thrilled to be a part of this discussion and really proud of you for making space for it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nita, and welcome, welcome, welcome. Let's turn it over to Tariana. Tariana, welcome to you as well. I'm glad you're here. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey.
Yes, good morning. Great to be here. I'm Tariana Navas-Nieves, and especially for the purpose of today's conversation, I actually wear a few hats. I am the Director of Cultural Affairs for the City and County of Denver. I'm also on the Mayor's Equity Leadership Team. The agency, the Arts and Culture Agency for the city, actually, we were the first agency in the city to have not just a statement of commitment, but actually a plan with very clear internal and external goals. And we really became the model for the city. And since then, maybe about 2 or 3 years after the mayor actually announced his equity platform, and I have the great honor to serve along with other 2 strong women to lead the work within the city, working with all agencies and about 13,000 employees. But I think my journey, as Nita said, I mean, is especially with this work, is closely personal. I think I've done equity work throughout my entire career. I think the difference is that probably half of my career, I did it quietly, right? At times it felt quite subversive. And when you do it in a space where there is no clear and articulate commitment, right? It becomes, you do bits and pieces, but you're not changing or transforming the culture of an organization. So I would say maybe 10 years ago, I made a very conscious choice to not just walk the walk quietly, but to talk about the walk and to request for others to hold ourselves accountable publicly. So that's where my journey has taken me. And then this year I've had, Nita and I have worked together for a number of years, but this year in particular, I think COVID and the collision of a global pandemic and economic crisis, and certainly this reckoning with racial injustice has brought us closer. And we've had the joy to design a monthly series of how to be an anti-racist organization that is being designed really by questions from the community. We are responding to what the community needs. So it's just been joyful, and I'm grateful to be here with all of you today.
And I might add, that's been an incredible series that you 2 have put on, and I've been able to watch all of them, and I've learned so much. So again, kudos to you, most definitely. And then, of course, we have our own Milford Adams. Milford is joining us this morning. Milford, very good friend of mine. I'm proud to be on the same panel with you and to welcome you. So Milford, please tell us about yourself.
Well, because a lot of you already know me, I'm not going to go into the details. Just know that I'm part of the team of directors for the Denver Metro Association of Realtors. I'm honored to serve. Incredible organization. If you have not become a member, join us. We'd love to have you. I want everybody to pay me for that little spot. But anyway, I am excited. And the amazing thing is that Denver Metro Association started this journey for diversity over 4 years ago when Scott Grossman was the chair of the board at the time. So, and we were able to put this program together. I'm excited about our journey that we're going on today. I want to share with you, and with my time, is encourage everyone that's on here. You part of the solution. It doesn't matter what hat you wear, or what color you are, or how wide or how small or how short or how dark. because I spit all of those. And I want you to know we cannot do it without you. In order for us to be successful dealing with diversity, inclusion, and equity, you have to come along. So don't be afraid to ask the hard questions to us. We're not gonna, anyway. So I just want to encourage you. This is a call to action as we go through this today, and encourage you to continue to participate in how you can establish in your firm, in your home, in your family, in your organization, whatever that piece look like, come alongside us. We need you. Our counterparts, we need you. And I want everyone to know I'm Black, and I know I have white counterparts out there that love and care about diversity. And so this is not a slam on any race in any way, shape, or form. We are here to build solutions, build relationships, and build partnerships for our association and for our nation and for our families. Thank you.
Thank you, Milford. Like I say, we're so glad to have you here with us, and coming in as chair-elect for DMAR as well. That's exciting. As I'd mentioned before, if you do have questions, there's a Q&A box at the bottom there. Please go ahead and type in whatever you're wondering, questions for our panelists, and we'll be getting to those as well throughout the presentation. Ashley will be monitoring those. But I do have some questions that have come forth from the Alliance, the Community Alliance itself, and I'd like to start there. When we're talking about those 4 words, diversity, inclusion, equality, and equity, are they the same? Are they interchangeable? Who wants to head us off? How about Nita?
Happy to. Great question. They are not the same. They are not interchangeable, but they do hinge on one another. So I think it's important, Derek, for the audience to understand that these words, diversity, inclusion, equity, and equality, actually are on a continuum. It might mean that in your department even, there might be some things that you're doing that would fit the category of diversity, and there might be things in that same department that might fit the definition of equity. So the reality is you could be doing all 4 of these things at one time. But one way for you to think about the words is actually like gears. The diversity gear turns the inclusion gear turns the equality gear turns the equity gear. They just turn each other. And the reality is when you stop working on one, all of the gears stop turning. Really quickly, I just want to tell you, Derek, that the best way to think about what delineates these words is this. Every one of these words was a social movement. The equality movement, 50s and 60s. The diversity movement, 70s and 80s. The inclusion movement, 90s. The equity movement right now. So they have come in decades too. I want you to know that the words are important for you to understand because you have to understand what you're going to do operationally with the words. Diversity is just about difference. That's all it means. It is not a synonym for race. We keep using it as a synonym for race, but it isn't. It is just a descriptor of our differences, whatever they are. If you're white, you're diversity. If you're Black, you're diversity. All of us are in the definition of diversity. So it's all about our differences in a good way. Inclusion is what you're going to do with your diversity. If you don't do anything with your diversity, then you just get to say, yay, I'm diverse. But if you are intentional about leveraging the diversity, skills, abilities, talents of other people, now you're talking inclusion. Equality is exactly what the word says. It's about making things equal. Level setting, bringing one group up to the same standard as another group. And then we're at equity. This is where we're squarely situated right now. Equity really is about creating systems. Hear me now, systems where people get what they need to thrive. We might not get the same things, but we get exactly what we need. So I just wanted you to know that there is a continuum and there are distinct things that happen with those 4 words.
Excellent. Anything you'd like to add, Tariana or Milford?
I would say that once you understand right the what it means, the definitions of and the differences between these concepts, I think when you are in a space, again, of your own business or your organization, is make them actions by asking certain questions. Like, right, when you are talking about diversity, let's say you want to diversify your board or diversify your staff, it's really about what's the action tied to what it means. Is as important to say who is in our space, who is not. When we're talking about inclusion, is what voices perhaps are not taken as seriously because they don't happen to be part of the majority, who perhaps is not showing up fully as themselves. When you look around the room, I always say, if you're wanting to diversify your board, please do not bring like one person of color by themselves. Like, don't do that, please. At least bring two. You know, it's a tough one. And I know that I look around this virtual screen, and I have no doubt that many of us have been the one in the room. That's a heavy burden to carry, right? So in that space is ask that question. And in terms of equity, is asking the question of how are you asking the right questions to change how you operate, to change your systems. And when you look around the table, and perhaps you look at the majority, is who is not here? You know, are you presenting a barrier by the space that we've created that is not allowing others to join? Like, what is impeding that we open our doors, right? We open our spaces to others. So I think is that action tied to those definitions that I think that it's what, right, that Nita and I are working towards all the time. It's let's making actionable items.
Definitely. Milford, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, they're already given great answers. So anytime that we looking at diversity, that's automatically there's going to be differences. And I think we as organizations and CEOs and leadership have to recognize there's going to be differences in the room. And then inclusion, if you remember when unions was formed in the United States, it was because it felt like their voice was not being heard. It wasn't even about the pay. It was like, I think pay was number 3, but it was about, if it's gonna affect me and how I do business or how I able to build generational wealth, can you please include me at the table? And also that's inclusion. And equity is just being fair with what we're wanting to do as an organization and what that may look like. I was speaking to some college students about a couple of weeks ago, and I gave the scenario is, if I look at, all of us have computers, iPads or whatever it is, our phones, and understand our laptops wouldn't work without the keyboard. It wouldn't work without the battery being charged. It wouldn't work without the hard drive. It wouldn't work without the software. So I asked them the question, what is more important in all of that? And the answer came back, and I shared with the body, is that we need everyone, because you can't power up to get the information. You can't attach to the hard drive to receive and download. And so in the keyboard, if you can't type it in, it can't get the message. So truthfully, diversity includes all of us, and every piece of diversity is important for our organizations and our families. Thank you, Derek.
Very true.
And then Derek,
Yes.
Derek, I have a really good question, and Nita, hopefully you can expand on this, but Grant asked, is the word just relevant as well? Anita, could you respond to that?
Yes, I'd love to respond to that. I think Grant's question is a great one. We use the word, is this just? And we also use the word, is this fair? This is another one of those moments where we need to talk about words. When we talk about just or justice, is the action, is what's happening really justified under the circumstances that we're in? So that could be really episodic. It could be based on whatever the circumstance is it just in that circumstance? Fair is a little bit different in that it talks about the action and treating people as they deserve to be treated, regardless of the circumstance. So they really have different complementary definitions. I tend to, Grant, this is just the world according to Nita, which doesn't make it always right. I tend to talk about just and fair together and not just. Just is really so circumstantial. Fair really is a little bit broader about how we look at people and how they deserve to be treated. I think they go together well. I really appreciate that question. That's a great one.
Great question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Obviously, we all come from different places, our upbringings, our experiences. Would you speak to the term inherent bias and how that plays into how we show up and when we show up at the table? Tariana?
Well, there's not such thing as, frankly, there's not such thing as human objectivity. I don't believe there is. I think, generally when in any of my speaking engagements, I always start by talking about myself in terms of where I come from, how I was raised, the fact that I am the mother of 2 young people with disabilities, one that has mental health illness, one identifies as LGBTQ. I mean, as I speak, right, it's already shaping an image of who I am. And you're looking from the outside. So just imagine what it's done, how it's shaped who I am. The fact that I was born and raised in a Caribbean island, the fact that I was, all of that is shaping who we are. And the reality is that, especially with this work, if we all show up with a peace of mind that it's in all of us, if we give each other the grace and permission to acknowledge that, especially when we are making decisions, I think that's a huge part of the work. Just for an example, I oversee a lot of selection panels in the city and county of Denver in terms of grant. We're philanthropy, we give a lot of money to artists, to organizations. And one of the first things I do is I talk about bias and I share my biases with the group. And I ask my team to share that. And in a way, it's like we're modeling or we're giving permission. And I say, for example, I am a Latina woman, I'm Puerto Rican. I hate mariachi music. I'm so sorry. I hate it, right? The question is, if we get an application of a mariachi group, it's not about, I'll call it my cup of tea, right? It's not whether this is my cup of tea or not, but is this the best example of mariachi music? Are they connected to community? There's all of these questions that then interrupt that bias. But I've already made it a point that it is important to acknowledge those. So in that case, again, I call it my cup of tea. It's not about whether this issue is my cup of tea, right? But then talk about what are the values that you are bringing to the table to then openly and discuss the issue at hand. So I think, inherent is very much part of us, and they're not always negative, right? There's a lot of positive. And lastly, I would say that biases, I think, come from lived experiences, and the negative biases, again, are very much part of our gut, right? It's a part of our brain. It's not something we decide. So if you've never, had a relationship with a Black person, right? All you've built in your mind is through media. And all of a sudden you're mugged by a Black person. That's it, right? Automatically, then it is not impossible to know that if you're all of a sudden presented with a Black person, that your gut, right? That your brain automatically is going to be triggered, perhaps to fear, because that was your experience, or that's what you learned through in the media. So I think the more open we can be about it, and the more grace we can give each other to acknowledge that, I think the better we will do, to hold ourselves accountable.
It would seem to me also that these discussions we're having go a long way in helping us think about our inherent biases, or think about things that we've always lived with or always thought, and maybe look at it from a little bit different perspective, or slightly different, and think, well, I never looked at it that way, and learn something and investigate further. And I think that's the beauty of coming together, is we learn so much from each other, and we gain so much personally and professionally and emotionally when we get to share, in this way. Milford, you want to add to this?
Thank you. First of all, I mean, I do believe that all of us in some form have some inherited bias. I don't like cauliflower. So if you try to put cauliflower on my plate, I mean, first of all, I'm gonna turn my nose up at it and all of the above. So that's a form of bias. Understand that bias, a lot of times it is inherited because of the environment that we was raised at. Just like she used the example, if you get mugged by a black person, I want to ask her, can we get mugged by a white person? No, I'm just joking. Just kidding, you guys, just kidding. I'm having fun because I want this to be fun. But understand that those are our core values. A lot of times it's set by our parents and the environments that we're in. And let me share this with you guys. A lot of times, a lot of people don't even know we're even biased because the way we was raised, and it don't even register that I did something wrong or I said that in the wrong way. You know, one of the things that through my journey through corporate America and sitting on boards is that, you know, as soon as somebody come and say, Milford, I think you'll be better over here. You just stereotyped me and you told me you're biased. When I said I'm better at leadership, I would love to be part of leadership to set those policies and things like that. But I'm very thankful that we have an opportunity to share these kind of things today and work towards solutions and recognizing that's one reason why we organized the Community Alliance for Denver Metro Association of Realtors. That's recognizing all the minority groups and making sure that it's fair, honest, and open dialogue where no one feels slighted and no one feels like they're not welcome. Thank you.
Very
And then
true.
Derek, I think I had a really great question that came in from Greg.
Excellent.
How do we overcome the pushback when it comes to creating diversity, inclusion, equality, and equity that people that are probably thinking that, are they asking for special privileges when wanting to create this space?
Good question.
Yeah, you know, I love that question. Thank you. Thank you for sharing it. Before I'd like to weigh in on it, but I also want to just weigh in one more thing
Please.
about bias. And the things that Milford and Tariana have shared are really important. I want to add to it. One thing, not everybody believes that bias is a thing. So we got to own that. Not everybody believes there's bias. Not everyone believes they are biased. And the reason that is because we have to stratify this bias. Some of it is conscious and some of it is unconscious. It is the unconscious bias, implicit bias, where we're in denial because it's unconscious. We actually don't know we have the biases. So we do have that. But what I want to inspire each of us to think about is we can't just talk about unconscious bias. We have to start talking about conscious bias. Conscious biases are the prejudices that you know you have. You got to name those in your inside voice. You don't have to share them. Be thinking about what your intentional prejudices are. Now, the reason I want you to do that is because 99.9% of the time, your conscious biases are related to the things that you might be doing unconsciously. They just have tentacles to one another. So I want you to be thinking about that. If you can name what your conscious ones are, you can also name what you might be doing unconsciously. Quickly, I just want to give you an example. I'm going to name one of my conscious biases. I trust you. I got to tell you. I have a conscious bias, intentional prejudice that I know I have against people that I think don't want to learn. Now, I don't mean go to college. I mean people that think they know everything already and don't need to listen to you. Them. That's my conscious bias. Now, I just shared it with you. What I want you to think about is what might I be doing unconsciously to people that I've named that? And I bet in seconds, you can think about what I might be doing to them unconsciously, like ignoring them, discounting their comments, not making eye contact, debating with them. I bet you're just reeling them off right now. Well, that exercise, it's my little unscientific trick, is a way that you can mitigate your own bias. You start with naming what's conscious first, and then what you might be doing unconsciously. So I wanted to just add that. And then I just want to tee up, Ashley, the question that you just shared with us. Like, what do you do with this diversity, equity, and inclusion work where people think it's special treatment? One of the biggest issues that we have in this whole body of work is somehow people have thought you needed to give up qualifications and merit to get to race. Like it's a zero-sum game. I want to dispel that myth right now. You don't give up qualifications and merit. If you're giving up qualification and merit, you're probably not doing this well and from a recruitment standpoint in the first place. When you lead with race, you assume qualifications and merit. You never give those up. And we've got to break that bias that we have, that somehow if we focus on race, that we're degrading or diminishing qualifications and merit. That is an absolute blatant stereotype that we have. So we have to really sort of disrupt the notion that that's what we're doing. Now, part of that is coming from our negative history in our workplaces. If you think about it, now this might be controversial, but let me just give you some history. If you think about why affirmative action happened, it happened to right historical hiring wrongs. And so a part of the myth about how people of color came to be in organizations in the first place has everything to do with that moment in our history. We set up a stereotype that all of these people of color, particularly Black people that were coming into organizations, were coming in with less qualification and less merit because of affirmative action. When the reality is that's absolutely a myth. They were coming in because we were righting a historical hiring discrimination wrong. And so part of the answer to this question is, we have to start filling in the blank about the storyline about how we got here in this myth. And some of those are a part of the storyline. I just wanted to tee that up for Milford and Tariana too, to weigh in.
Well, and actually just, I've always found this point of data really interesting, but when we look at the history of affirmative action, the first 2 decades of affirmative action, the greatest growth in career and education was experienced not by any racial group, but by white women. And nearly 70% of white women surveyed opposed affirmative action for BIPOC, for people that identify as Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So let that sit in, right? And I love how Nita brought the practical aspects of, when we're recruiting, and how many times that we've heard, we really want to hire the person that's best qualified. And Nita and I joke about this, not just because they are a certain color. And we always answer, yes, we want to hire the best qualified person. And folks, this is exactly an example actually of bias, right? The assumption that because you are either recruiting for, because I think that's another piece, you cannot diversify your group, your staff or your board, or et cetera, by putting an ad out and staying at your desk. It ain't, it's not going to happen that way. In order for you to actually diversify your staff, you need to recruit, which means you need to get yourself out there, and you need to connect, because if you haven't built relationships with those communities, not only are you just not going to know, right, where to publish, where to promote these opportunities, but I will tell you that when I'm looking at, and I do this as, I guess, as an exercise, I love going and looking at job ads and job descriptions. I want to know where what your values are. And that's reflected in how you, what your job description looks like, how you state your values. And if I don't see values of equity in that job, I don't want to work for you, right? And then the third thing is, do not just wait to develop a culture of inclusion by bringing people of color into your organization. You need to do that work prior. Are you ready to do this? because the last thing you want is to bring, BIPOC people into a space. And this, obviously, we're leading with race, but this has to do with other identity areas, a person with a disability, right? You don't want to wait to get it right when the person are already on board, right? You want to create a space where you are ready for that. And that takes time, and that takes certainly intentionality.
I think people assume that there's this checklist that's out there somewhere and they just go 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's so not the case. Just what you're speaking to, it's more of a development, it's a process. We don't just flip a switch and here we are. Milford, you want to add to that, please?
I do. What they shared already is just awesome. And I thank Greg for the question as well. I think I'm just talking to the Association of Realtors. NAR, I think, was a powerful statement a few weeks back, put out an apology about the current situation dealing with diversity, recognizing that we've done something wrong and all of the above. I think we have a great opportunity to move forward because part of it is recognizing there was a problem. And I want to read this statement that our president from the National Association of Realtors said. It said, discriminatory practices weren't just tolerated for many years, they were actually baked into the association guiding principle for much of the 20th century. For decades, realtors excluded members based on race, sex, and from many associations. And formerly, our association, which we all are part of, wouldn't even allow Blacks to even be part of it. And they were against the Fair Housing Act. So I think that's powerful when an organization, I'm very proud of our association because it recognized there was a problem. So then when you talk about equity and inclusion, you got to understand there's a group of people that are performing at a lower level because we didn't have the same opportunity that our counterparts had. That's reality. But understand when we talk about how we're going to do this, it have to start at the top of the leadership and CEOs and presidents and all of that, because we don't get a buy-in from the CEOs and owners of companies, diversity will never happen. I don't care how many feel-good meetings you have. We recognize Black History Month, Juneteenth, ABC, CBS's, it won't work. But if we get a buy-in from our top leadership, when I say top leadership, they have to be involved with it at the beginning to show that they're serious about making some corrections. Thank you.
Along those lines, Milford, I know that you came from a corporate management position at a Fortune 500 company, a large company. And I think, Nita, you also came from the corporate world back. How did that impact or influence where we sit today and how your teaching and sharing was changed or took a different direction because of that position when you started?
Well, I think many of the missteps that I was a part of in my corporate experience are what shape how I do the work today. I think some of the misdefinition of words actually started in the corporate environments. A part of the diversity movement was grounded in helping corporate environments get on the bus with the fact that diversity was even happening. The train had left the station and the corporations had to figure out how to convince themselves and others that diversity was good and trying to make the compelling case for diversity the very best they could. So I learned a lot out of that process. One of the things that I did learn is that we were really focused on figuring out how to create a checklist for people to know what to do in this work. So there were diversity checklists. You did know what you needed to do. You did know that you needed a certain number of this and a certain number of that. I call it the Noah's Ark syndrome. We were doing that. And what makes today difficult for us is we've been acculturated to do exactly what that moment and that movement taught us. To count things, to have a checklist and a guide, to sometimes be silent about what we're doing. and sometimes just to embed it in our processes in a really passive way. We are in a different moment and movement now that doesn't at all match where we came from in the diversity and inclusion movements. This movement is not passive. This movement is not about nouns. This movement is about verbs. It's action oriented. So here we're talking about doing something. Here we're talking about, can we build a system that, by the way, we've never seen before, and we have no playbook for, and you're not getting a checklist for? Can we architect a system like that in a collective? How do we do that? That's where we are today. And so some of the bumpiness that I think everybody feels, frustration, bumpiness, being lost, has a lot to do with the fact that equity work is really new work, because it's systems work. It's not about your heart or your mind. It's about, are we going to construct a system or dismantle a system that doesn't work for everyone? And what's our organizational commitment to that? That's a very different sort of line of questioning for organizations today.
Good points.
I love that, and I'm glad I get to chime in on that. So I was a product of back in the 80s and 90s. I know I look young. I'm just real preserved. Black people are just preserved, okay? But that's a joke again. But anyway, that is true though, but whatever. But understand, I was a product. Remember in the 80s and 90s when they were doing the EEOC and corporation had to hire minorities, all of the above. So I was a product of that. They recruited me directly out of school for General Mills. And they basically told me that we're hiring you because we need more Black folks in our organization, and they have to be able to check those boxes. I think that was a great start. And I think Nita said it earlier, is that they checked the box, but we didn't change any of the systems that continues to manifest that type of behavior and all of the above. So I think that's part of it. I do want to say, from our president from the National Association of Realtors, when he gave that statement, he said, it starts with us. If we're going to change the system of injustice that we know with redlining and higher interest rate and predatory lending and not being looked over promotion for a job and all of the above, he said it's got to start with us. Recognize, own it, and then let's work together as partners in building relationships. And I think that's what we're doing on this call today. Thank you.
Excellent. I wanted to add also, a couple of comments have come through asking about books and resources where people can visit. Tariana has been putting some wonderful examples in the box below. This is being recorded, so you will be able to re-access it. And I'm thinking we can put together a resource guide as well to get out to our attendees. So thank you again for adding those to the chat box, Tariana, and Nita as well, if you have anything you want to add. Same with you, Milford, books that we're looking at. Ashley.
Yeah, we've got some good questions that are coming in. Yes, I'm excited. So Lori asked a great question. Real estate is a great example of the number of white women allies that leveraged the opportunity to access and sell real estate was a result of being seen as unrepresented when they, in fact, they've always been. Nita, can you speak about your ballerina ally story?
Yeah, thank you so much. I love that you've brought up the topic of allyship. It kind of goes back to me thinking about nouns and verbs. It's wonderful to call yourself an ally and to really feel comfortable with that. It's quite another thing to actually do what it takes to be an ally. And that's what's most important. I did have a story that I did in a TED Talk that talked about a white woman who came into a segregated Black neighborhood, which happened to be mine, to offer up her skills in teaching us ballet, because the ballet schools would not accept Black children in those schools. I had been turned down 6 different times, and each time they said, we don't accept Negroes. So this lady walked in as a very unlikely ally into a place where she probably wasn't even supposed to be, and bucking the system at that. then decided if the system wasn't going to support these children, then she would. And that's exactly what she did. So the notion that I'm talking about here is what an opportunity in a moment in a movement like this for all of us to be unlikely allies. Unlikely meaning you might find yourself being an ally in a scenario that may or may not directly impact you. It really is selfless work where you decide there's a cause, there's a struggle, there's an oppression, there's a marginalization that I can use my own privileges to do something about that may not affect me at all. So it's a cool story about how I lived through that at age 5 years old. I was in kindergarten when that happened. But for each one of us, we have an opportunity to not just look at what benefits us, but to look at what other people are struggling with and what would benefit them if we just leveraged our own privileges, resources, or talents differently. I love that question, and what a moment for allyship.
Thank you. No, that was a great question. It's so important to have a place to call home, be it your community, be it the place that you dwell. And I think that oftentimes we take that blessing for granted. And when we actually look and realize that there are so many people right now who are struggling and trying to find a place to live, a safe place, a community, we need to step back and kind of think, how can I impact that? And I think that is an excellent example, Nita, of how we become part of a community and we learn and we teach in that community and we help others to succeed. I think that's key when we're having this discussion. Helping others succeed, I think, is critical. Speaking of community, I want to take a quick aside here. Tariana is so involved with the arts here in Denver. And I kind of wanted to ask you this question because it's kind of been weighing on me. Simple question, but how do you feel, Tariana, that art and culture play into establishing and setting up a community for success?
So let me start by saying that when I think about arts and culture, especially when I think about culture, I do not define culture from the Eurocentric perspective of, the theater, music,
Sure.
all of that, it's arts and culture.
Sure.
But for me, culture is, and we actually, if you look at the definition, right, it's about how groups and how community find identities, right? So it can be, culture is language, culture is neighborhood, culture is how you choose to pray, culture is how you choose to engage with your family, it's about food. So my concept of culture is a very, very broad. And I believe in sovereignty of culture, which means it is not my job to define what Ashley's culture is, or what Derek's culture is, or what a community's culture is. It could be about the woman who's been doing textiles for generations in her home. That is culture, right? How communities of immigrants come together to face and to get through trauma through food. So that is culture. And I think it's important to, when we look at culture from that standpoint, then I think we understand the critical piece of how and why culture is so critical and is at the heart of any type of community building that we do. If we want a community to thrive, then at the heart of that, we must have equity and we must work towards justice, which again is very much about the idea that race is not going to determine your quality of life, right? Like that's what we work towards. That's what, getting a community to thrive is about. And it's also about, like Milford said at the beginning, it's going to take all of us, right? So it's that collective work. That's what builds community. And that's what culture is all about. So for me, it is, and actually I think that arts and culture is the one thread that can actually get through anything and everything. There is a place for culture in real estate. There is a place for culture in accounting. There is a place of culture in, community development. There is a place of culture in health. So in everything we do, I think culture has the power and the capacity to bring people together. And we can, as humans, we can all connect through culture, no matter our political views, no matter how we choose, who you choose to pray to. So for me, I think, again, I look at culture as something that it's much broader, and it really breaks with a lot of the norms that we've had, I think, in this country, to really lead with a Eurocentric way. And it's tied also to, again, philanthropy, which again, it has a history back to Europe. It has a history of who held the power. And then in this country, many actually slave owners are the one that actually amass dollars to then generations and generations after they're choosing to invest, right? Is all of those that tied to history. So yeah.
Great. No, very good points. Good points. Milford, thoughts on that?
Yeah, and it is a great point. This is really awesome. Isn't this fun and exciting that we all can get together? I'll be glad when we can get together and hug each other and touch each other. But isn't this is fun, you guys. We can do this. Yes, thank you for that hug. I feel it, Anita. So there's a word. It's called tessellation, and it means a process of art. And when I read this word, I looked at it and think about this. When you remember the old days and your grandmother put those quilts together, they would just get a lot of different patterns and sew them all together. And some of us may still have that today, but understand one of the things that our grandmothers did is that they never let the other pattern over pattern the other one. They interlock where each pattern will be seen. And I think that's a form of art. That's the form of a masterpiece of our society, when we could bring every race of people together, green, yellow, blue, and make it a quilt. Don't overlay it where one has more authority than the other, but we're equal and we're working together to make those changes. Thank you.
Excellent. Ashley, what you got over there?
Yeah, I've got some great things coming in. So this is from Grant. Are we making any progress to overcome white fragility, by which I mean whites being so overly sensitive about race relations? They take it personally as though you're accusing them of being racist, and what you mean is the existence of systematic and institutional racism.
Woo.
Who wants to jump on that one? Big question.
I would say that in order to speak about white fragility, I think we need to speak about the understanding of white privilege. I mean, I think that's very much at the root of it. And I think the simplest way to describe white privilege is, it doesn't mean that you haven't suffered, because I think a lot of times what we hear, right, is like, no, I don't have any privilege. I was born poor. I was born poor in rural America and I got no privilege. It doesn't mean that you didn't struggle. It doesn't mean that you didn't suffer. But the reality is the color of your skin, your race was not part of it, right? And I think it's a critical point to also remind ourselves that we are here really focusing on race. We're leading with race, not at the expense of other areas of marginalization and other areas of identity. We are being race explicit and not race exclusive. And the reason why we've made that choice is because when we look at the outcomes, life outcomes, race is the biggest predictor of outcomes in this country. And that touches on education, on health, on housing, right? So when we look at that, if we address, right, inequities at the level of race, starting with race, then everything else, right, we are making it better for everybody else. And then there's the idea of intersectionality, right? Is I know that, let's say my daughter and my son, they have disabilities, which again, it's talk about an area of marginalization. The fact that they are BIPOC takes them even down lower on the barrel of inequity, right? So that's what we're talking about. So the moment I think you acknowledge that there is this inherent white privilege, we then shift to white fragility, which I think is when we're having conversations about race, these are difficult conversations, like Nita said at the beginning, right? And difficult in the sense that we live in a white supremacy society, which means, and I'm not talking here about white hoods, right? I'm talking here about the belief that a race is superior than another. And this country was built on that, right? That the norm is whiteness, right? So generally, I can say, I am a woman of color, I'm a Latina American, or I'm an African American. You generally don't hear, I'm a white American, right? That is the norm. But the reality is there's such a thing, right? It's like, yes, you have to acknowledge that you are white, which is the norm, right? Is the majority of where the power lies. So I know this is a long way to take getting to white fragility, but I think all of that to say that when you have that inherent, belief, and again, inherent can be, again, unconscious, that when you talk about race and you actually call out white people can feel it in their body, right? I'm not talking about, your mind saying, I don't want to be racist, or there is a physical reaction to that. And I again, because I lead with generosity, I want to acknowledge the fact that white fragility, I acknowledge and I understand that there is a physical reaction, right? People do not necessarily make a choice that, oh, I want to show up as, fragile and I'm white. No, there is a physical reaction based on fear, based on fear of not just appearing to be racist, but fear of loss, because it may mean that, right, it's like there's the pie, and it means that if others want some of the pie, I'm going to lose some of my pie. It's really rooted in fear. And I think the white fragility then automatically what it does, right, it blocks your learning, right? It automatically makes you a victim, in your own space. And then unfortunately what happens is that it shuts down the learning process. So I think that white fragility, and I think we've put it, I think most of you are aware of the white fragility, white Robin DiAngelo, she's coined the term, but I think it's important. I recommend for all white people to read that book because it gets to the root about what white fragility is, and it does it in a way that is tied to history, is tied to the systems rather than just the emotion that people may feel in a moment.
Nita, please, you're nodding there. I want to hear what you're thinking.
Hey, well, it's ditto everything that Tariana shared. I want to just add one more thing to it, especially for those of you in the call that are parents or have grandchildren. I also want you to think about the fragility that happens at a younger age. There are two sides of that. There are biases, because we talked about that earlier, that get set up in very young children. I want you, if you don't know already, to do a little research on what was called the 1940s doll test. It was a 1947 social experiment where psychologists were trying to figure out the impact of segregation on very young Black children. They were 3 to 7 years old. And they used dolls to do the experiment. They had a black doll and a white doll. So the researchers would say things like, who's the smartest? Who's the cutest? Who's the nicest? And over and over and over again, these little Black kids would pick the white doll. And then they'd say, who's the meanest? Who's the ugliest? Who's the dumbest? And over and over again, these little Black kids would pick the black doll. And so I want you to know that a part of this entire conversation is that bias sets up as early as age 3.
Gee.
And that we have to be thinking about our culpability in that. So if you think about a kid, a little Black kid, who at age 3 has already developed a bias towards whiteness, what happens in their lived experience as they grow up? What happens to them in middle school or high school? What happens to them when they come and work in your workplace? What does that represent when we have biases that can set up because of the profile of whiteness that we have in this country in particular? I'd argue that we've got an anti-Blackness sentiment across the globe. But what do we do in our systems to make sure that there is no 3-year-old or 5-year-old that's already deciding that there's something about the color of their skin that's bad? On the flip side of that, there have been experiments since then that ask white children the same questions. And over and over and over again, white children picked themselves as the better, the smartest, the nicest. And so as we fast forward a lot of that, a lot of the things that we're going to need to contemplate, and right now, I wanted you to know a little bit of the history too about how soon these biases can set up and how soon even little white children learn about the profile of whiteness, and how quickly little Black kids learn about, in particular, how they are not the profile of good, attractive, wise. We have to do our work.
And tied to that, a great recommendation, and I think I included it on the chat, but if you're white and you can be a parent, a grandparent, a teacher, highly, highly, highly recommend the book Raising White Kids in Bringing Up Children in a Racially Unjust America by Jennifer Harvey. Actually, on our website, we also recorded. We brought her to Denver and we recorded her talk. And I can promise you that it's not just about raising kids. It's very much also about raising adults and raising ourselves. But it's a wonderful tool from a white perspective. You know, how children, like Nita said, how children are raised, and most important, how do you raise white children? You know, so that in the future they actually can approach anti-racism work from a different space.
Eric, can I get in on this?
Please.
So I want to bring up a couple of points. One, we realize a lot of this started from the George Floyd, when the officer had his knee on the neck and this gentleman passed away. But understand, remember when it first came out, there was a lot of titles. When we use the term, I want to make sure when we use the term Black Lives Matter, we're not talking about the hate part of Black Lives Matter. But then remember when everything started coming out, well, Blue Lives Matter, all lives matter, white lives matter. Well, understand all lives can't matter, Black lives don't matter. But we're not talking about the hate, we're just talking about these systems that we're talking about today, because we're not part of that hate group. We're part of the solution. We're building bridges. We're tearing down walls. That's what we're doing today. I want you to understand when we talk about tailwind and headwind, let me just share with you. A headwind is like being in a hurricane and the wind is blowing. You've seen the news people do it many times. They're holding onto the poles. That's what they mean by headwind. Head means that people that look like myself, every time they try to make a step, this wind is so severe in front of them that it's almost taking them out of their legs, or they give up the fight anymore, and all of the above. And that's what we call a headwind. I can paint my business with headwind situations that I have faced as a Black man. And this is true. And a tailwind is when somebody will come along with you and push you up the corporate ladder, open the doors for you, walk with you, and teach you how to sit in that seat to be the next president, the next CEO, without some roadblocks being thrown at you that you're not worthy of the seat. The thing that I always remember, whatever position I'm in, I earned the position on merit. I just happen to be Black. And sometimes it seems like, well, it's not good enough because of the skin color. Move the skin color out of the way. I want to share this story with you guys, and I'll be real quick. So a parent called me, white parents called me and said, Milford, we have 2 Black kids that we adopted from another nation. Now they're 10 and 13. This was about a week ago. The parents called, somebody referred them to me to talk to me about it. And the parents, up until then, have shielded their kids from all of this bias and race and being judged. But guess what? They're in the school system. So this 10-year-old boy is constantly being called the N-word by a young white boy, and repeatedly. And it's a joke and everybody's laughing and all of the above. The white parents, they were so angry about it. So they went to the school and they're yelling and screaming at the principal and the counselor. And this went on for about, probably they said, a month. Find out, first of all, they never even talked to the young boy about it, never contacted his parents about it, and just kind of swept it under the rug. But let me share this with you. If I went to that school and yelled and said that something was unjust, that my kid is going through, that my kid is being bullied, they're gonna look at me. If I'm yelling and screaming, they're gonna look at me and say, he's another angry Black man with a chip on his shoulders. So I told the parents that you gotta bring it down. We can't do the knee-jerk reaction. You gotta get involved with the school board. You gotta get involved with the counselor. You gotta get involved with the organization that are setting the policies for this to happen, where they will honestly sit down with the young man. Clearly he learned this at home in some form, and identify, where's this coming from? Because a lot of times, that old saying, hurting people hurt people. And I just want us to be aware of that. That headwind is real in any of us that have moved up the corporate ladder. We have seen it happen when we should have been promoted 5 years ago. And it took actually 5 years before we actually got the position. Thank you.
And then
Ashley.
Derek, I have I've got a lot of great things coming in, but I want to start with this one. And Derek, this could really be for you. Can you describe being the second generation as a realtor and what that means to our community for generational real estate?
Good question. I've been a realtor since I was 18. So I got into the business following my mother, who's also my partner in our business. And ironically, when I started, I didn't work with her at all. I was with another agent in the office. So I learned a lot of things from that agent. And then, gosh, decades later, she and I came together and we started working together. And one of the best experiences of my life by any means. But when we're talking about who we learn from and what we take on the journey, I think it's critical that we are learning and taking from those that we admire and those that we respect and those that we learn from. As you mentioned earlier, it's important that we take the time to think about our own biases, talk to people and learn what their biases are, and have a discussion. And I think being in real estate, being a realtor right now in particular, we are on a precipice of greatness, if you will. It's whether or not we decide to take the dive or step back from the cliff. And I think the pandemic has instilled in us the ability to look within, to think, to figure out what works for me, what doesn't work for me, what do I need to learn, what have I always wanted to learn, but I haven't because I haven't had the time. So many different things right now come into play. And listening to our panelists this morning, it just makes me question, why haven't we been talking this way all along? Why haven't we been discussing these things on a greater level all along? Because we learn so much from each other when we do that. So back to the initial question of being a second generation realtor, love it. Real estate is an amazing, amazing profession. And I think that with every subsequent generation we teach, I'm here because I want to help others learn. I want to learn myself. If I can give someone a bit of advice that they can run with, so be it. I feel better. I did my job. It's not about me making myself wanting to, say, here I am, second generation realtor, yay. It's more about what can I share with my colleagues and my friends and my peers that I've learned to make them better. Because I think it falls on each and every one of us to make the next generation stronger and wiser and better. So Long answer to a short question. Nita, when we talk about these things, you feel this cloud, if you will, that comes down on us and we start feeling, oh my gosh, there's so much to this. It's not that checklist, right? It's not do 1, 2, and 3 and you'll feel better. And I think oftentimes we start having these discussions and all of a sudden we're like, oh, this is too much. This is too heavy. How do we alleviate that? Or where can we start on the basis level to start figuring out how do I get from A to C?
Yeah, it is heavy and it is big, and there are some realities. Reality number one, there is the likelihood that many of us will not see a system of equity built in our lifetime.
Mm.
I think I might be one of those people. I see it in the sight line, but we may not see completed equity in my lifetime. So the very first thing I would say there is, are you committed to doing this work even if you don't get to see the finished product in your lifetime? Are you willing to set the stage for a legacy we'd all be proud of? So that's number one. Number two, equity work doesn't call for you to work on everything. It does call on you to work on something. And so your responsibility at the individual level is to start to think about what part of the system you'd be willing to do some work on, some allyship on, some construction work on. Make that decision, that commitment, and then get to work. I want you to know that whatever you pick, you multiply that by the millions of other people that I'm saying the same thing to. If everybody just did a little bit of the equity work, we might get to it. But I think we have to make a commitment like we've never done in history before. My commitment in working on equity is I want to do something about the education system.
Mm.
We shouldn't still be talking about educational inequities. And so I've decided that's the place, and I've also decided what I can do in that system. The reality is what we have to do is name what we think the barriers are in the system. If you can name the barrier, like this is the fence that's in place that keeps people from thriving in the system, doing well in the system, even in real estate. What are the fences in your system that if you just took those fences or barriers down, people would really get what they needed to thrive in the system? Once you name those, then you can do something with it. So I think a part of what's going on, Derek, is it's so overwhelming. We haven't even named what the fences are in our system so we can get laser focused on what we can do. So we've got to distill it down so that people can really get engaged in the work. And all of us can do that at all different levels.
Milford.
Yeah, I echo what she just said, and I think it basically comes down to what we're doing as the Denver Metro Association of Realtors to put inclusion and diversity and equity. I think it's starting with just a calm conversation, recognize that we have some systems in place that may make other individuals struggle. But I'm going to definitely push on this. You got to make it fair, open, honest communication. Otherwise, it would never work. Our organization worked because we built the environment where men and women that don't look like me or look like me can come together and say, this has been a real struggle in my life. And I felt like I was unfairly judged or unfairly treated. One of the things that when we started our committee with the Denver Metro Association of Realtors, there was tears in that room when we started that process. And by far, because of the stories of the hurt and the pain of race issues, it was real in all of our communities. But understand, it was a safe place for me to say, I need help. How do we make changes? I want to be part of the solution and make changes. I told you about the parents. Remember, I told the white parents, they were like angry. And I said, I'm sorry, you're going to have to start at home and talk to them. You got to talk to your boys about race. You can't ignore it. They're being hit with it. You got to sit down and make sure that they are strong enough. There's a foundation strong enough to know that mom and dad still love me and care about me through all of this. And I think we as parents, because that helped change our system. If we started spending that time at home and telling, I told the parents, I'm sorry that you got to tell your son when you're driving, when you get pulled over, keep your hand on the steering wheel. I'm sorry. I had to tell my son that. That's reality. I want my child to come home safe. And it doesn't mean, I'm not talking about defunding police and all of that crazy stuff or whatever, because somebody break into my house, I'm calling the police, okay? So it's not about that, but what I'm saying, there is pieces in this system that doesn't allow equal and fair dealing. And that's all we asking for today. Thank you.
And then Derek, I have a really great statement, and maybe we can all kind of chime in on that one. So this is from an anonymous reader. I read NAR's apology and then read the many comments from the agents in the response to the statement. Not all, but most did not support the apology because the individual agent didn't think they were part of the problem. They didn't believe they had ever done anything racist.
Who wants to add some ideas to that?
Would you mind repeating that, Ashley?
Absolutely.
Cut off.
I read NAR's apology and then read the many comments from the agents in response to the statement. Not all, but most did not support the apology because the individual agent didn't think they were part of the problem. They didn't believe they had ever done anything racist.
If you want, I can, you guys want to go first?
Go ahead, go ahead and start.
All right,
Yeah, I know it's our industry, and understand, let me say this. That's an excellent question.
Mm-hmm.
All of the above, and we want to acknowledge that. I can share with you right now, I know, I'm using white and black today because that's what we're talking about. I know white folks that seriously, honestly, in their heart, never knew that this level of bias and racist issues that was going on in the United States, because they was not around it to that level. And then even if they was around it, some of the corporate, when we talked about biases, wasn't aware of it. But understand this, people that pushes the race issue, they identify with somebody else. Most people don't go, they wouldn't come to me and talk to me about race issues, and it's not, do you believe all this black stuff that's going on? They're not, because they know they're not going to approach me like that. But there's white folks that they would never approach like that. People identify behaviors in people when we start creating hate speech and all of the above. Whether we accept it or not, we've seen a presentation on redlining. The reality, it happened in the Denver metro area. We can't ignore that. We have the history. We have so even though you wasn't directly part of it, it did serve in a way of keeping wealth and home ownership out of Black folks' hands. And then if they can get a home, you have to be stereotyped to another area that you're going to pay higher interest rates and all of the above. We all have to take ownership of it. I'm sorry that it didn't happen on your watch. Just like me, I could be angry, or I can be part of the solution to help push the ball forward. We as an organization, we as families, we as leadership can no longer kick the can down the road for our children, because the truth be told, the young folks don't understand all of this mess going on because they have not been around it. We're teaching them this with all of this stuff that's going on in our nation. And I don't know if I answered that question correctly. We all have a responsibility. I'm sorry, I have a responsibility to not be angry and serve on boards and get involved with organizations that we can help change some of the system of injustice.
Well, and there's an opportunity, right? I think when I think about real estate, I think the fact that you can actually tie, and this is me, I'm a big data nerd, but I think it's so critical tie history and data to, to get to an understanding, right? Because I think it's hard often for people to get to an understanding without facts, right? It's about facts, not, and I think obviously redlining is at the heart of it. If there is an understanding of the history of redlining in our country, I think in real estate, you can then certainly connect to that. We live in a segregated country because of that, one of the many reasons. But also when you look at the data, I think it was a few years back on the census, 74% of ownership of white people versus like 44% of Black, home ownership. And I think when we look at that reality, it's and if you are either a white person or a BIPOC person within real estate, there is an opportunity to not just be a real estate agent, but to be a change agent, right? And that would be my call. And as a Puerto Rican woman who lives in a neighborhood that it's mostly white, I can tell you that, that internalized racism is very much ingrained in a lot of people of color. I was sharing the other day that, if our yard, if we haven't mown the lawn, automatically I feel like, oh my God, they're going to look around and they're going to say, oh, those are the Puerto Ricans, right? Like automatically, when I moved to this neighborhood, we did get a flyer that said, Mexicans get out. And of course, my first thing was like, well, we're not Mexican, but here we are. But, and this is 20 years ago, right? So this is very much part of our reality now. And I think, again, as not just real estate agents, but change agents, if you are within, if we're part of the system, I think there's such opportunity. And of course, that starts within, right? It's not just like Nita said, if we think about big picture, the reality is we don't know what equity looks like because we have not experienced equity. We can only move towards, on this journey. But in the field, I think there is so much that can be done from, and as a business as well, is like, let's move beyond compliance, right? I think equity is definitely very much about changing systems, changing laws, changing policies. That is critical for the work to stick. Having said that, at the heart of the work is we must go beyond compliance if you want to really make that change. So I think, again, real estate is just ripe with opportunities for all of you.
You bring up a point for me, Tariana, that it's critical that we're having these discussions. One-on-one, I think, is critical. I think that sometimes friends and family don't necessarily sit down and ask the questions because they assume what our answer is going to be, when in many situations, the answer is completely different than what people would assume. And I think, again, as you mentioned, Milford, we make the assumption that things are a certain way, not really understanding what is the other person thinking, what was their journey, and how were they impacted by that. So the discussion, the questions, I think, are critical that we don't do. We make the assumption, or we hear those statements, some of my best friends are, fill in the blank. That makes me a little crazy when I hear that, because I'm like, what does that really mean? Does that mean that you're trying to sympathize with me or that you're trying to agree with me? What's that statement really about on the deepest level? So just a thought there. Nita.
Yeah, I love that, Derek. So a couple of other things are happening just to go along with what you're saying. Nobody wants to be called a racist.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to own that they are. No one wants to say that they're complicit in racism. White supremacy is a big, scary word. Nobody wants to attach to that one either. We struggle with looking at our friends that are people of color and saying racism is happening to them. Nita, you got a PhD and a nice house and a decent car. Racism can't be happening to you. So we have so many stereotypes about what we think things are and things aren't. We're in the midst of that right now. I think we're in a racial reckoning, but we're in a reckoning of all of those things too. So we got to get really factual. Racism is built right into the fabric of all of our systems. Every single system. I don't care how lovely you are, how woke you are, in the fabric of every one of our systems, particularly in the US, racism was baked in. And it's very specific. It was anti-Blackness that was baked right into our systems. We did not want Black people in the workplace, except for particular jobs that were menial. We did not want Black people in every neighborhood. So as you look at your own sector, you have to think about the history of how it was built. We did not want Black children in particular schools. I mean, go to sector, system. The answer is the same. It was an anti-Blackness sentiment. We needed to build structures, systems, processes that kept Black people out. So I think if we just tell the truth about that history, we're onto something. But we got to pay attention to how that has manifested in today's system. 2020, December 18th, there are still residuals in some cases of that same racist structure that's still baked right into our system. So the obligation that we have, and I'm begging us to do this, the obligation that we have is to make sure, as much as we can in our lifetimes, to pull out the residual of the racist systems that were built to keep people like me, people like Ashley, people like Milford and beyond out intentionally. We got to get it out of the system. You shouldn't be able to sleep at night knowing that it's still sitting there in our systems and we're operating in them. I really appreciated a question that Lori Pace did in Q&A. Lori, I hope you don't mind me calling your name out. And the question really was about your experiences with a realtor. Maybe children, Black kids, white kids, all have the same definition of realtor, but what was your experience? I'm so thankful that you asked that question because our experiences have been different. I answered in the Q&A that, you know, I grew up in segregation. So for a long time, we couldn't buy anything. There was no such thing as a mortgage company that would finance a house for you. So we were renters until there came a time when you could get a mortgage, but when you got one, you were redlined. So we could only live in a certain place. And when the day came when we could integrate a predominantly white neighborhood, I remember the hellish nature of that too. We had a realtor who was Jewish, who took us to that white neighborhood and said, do you see a house that you like? And we were scared to death because we knew the neighborhood didn't want us there. But we found a house. My parents were brave. We found a house. The house was vandalized by white neighbors. The N-word was sprayed on our garage door. The mailbox was knocked down. But I got to tell you something. Every time something happened, that realtor showed up.
Wow.
And he told us the story about the same thing happening to his Jewish family when they tried to integrate. I just thought, you know, a Jewish person was a white person, and what do you mean? Didn't even know the storyline. I'm shaped by that story, and that I shouldn't generalize the lived experiences of people, even in real estate. And so I sort of want to leave you with that, is think twice about what's in front of you as you advance this work. Don't assume that people don't have a storyline that informs what we do in this body of work we call equity. We all have it. We just have to make a space for the stories to come out. And this is a great example of how that works and what that looks like.
I love that you mentioned that, Nita, because it just
Powerful.
reminded me, like with any industry, right? You want to see yourself represented. And I'll never forget that we've had the same real estate person, God, since we moved here to Colorado. Like literally, it's been 25 years. We've owned 3 homes, the same real estate person. She happens to be a white woman who spent, I don't know, more than 10 years living in Puerto Rico. She speaks the language, speaks the language like Spanish like a Puerto Rican. So she's definitely understands the culture. And there was not just that connection from the beginning and that understanding, but also to Nita's point, that understanding, right, of the sensitivity and the empathy that has to be tied to where you want to, what place you want to call home. And the process was as much as finding a dwelling, as much as finding a place of belonging.
Right.
Right. And I think, again, as in your field, is you have, right, and again, going back, incredible opportunity that through empathy and through that understanding and speaking to those values, to actually be not just a change agent, but to actually be the agent, the person that is actually supporting a family or supporting a young couple to find a place of belonging, not just a dwelling. And to this day, again, we remain friends. And there were those times, to Nita's point, that I reached out when we received that welcome flyer in our, porch. And thankfully, I think we responded to, of course it hurt, but we responded with some, the defense mechanism for us was to kind of joke about it, amongst us. But she's the person we called, and we said, thank you for just being our partner, our friend through this process. We're still here, still very white. I think we know the black guy who happens to be an attorney friend of my husband who's married to the white woman. I mean, still, again, this is almost 20 years later. But I can say today that this is a place that I feel that as we belong, as much as it hasn't changed that much, is a place of belonging. So thank you for bringing that up, Nita, because believe it or not, people, is you have the capacity, right? You are in a space that you can be much more than somebody that is, is going to be at the heart of a transaction.
Very true. Milford, do you want to add to that?
I think those ladies knocked it out of the ballpark.
Thank you.
So
yes.
I don't think I have to add to that. I mean, it just says, if I make any comment, it says, truthfully, we can build relationships and we can build partnerships that last long beyond the sale of a home or listing of a home. And I think we as professionals have an opportunity to build those paths and remove those stereotypes, even when we working with our clients. Thank you.
Very true. Ashley, as we're wrapping things up, do you want to add anything to this discussion?
I think this has been a great discussion. And I think all of the different comments and questions that have came in is exactly what we needed. We need to continue to have conversations like this, and not just in this safe space, be able to branch that out to other lines of business throughout the community. And so I've just been very thankful to be a part of that. And I appreciate the invite. And yeah, this has been great. I appreciate it.
I am, like I say, thrilled with this panel and thrilled with the things we discussed today. I'm going to go through real quick and have you all wrap up and say a few parting words. I would encourage anyone who's interested in learning more about anything we discussed today or in learning more about the Community Alliance, look us up, become involved. My big thing is it doesn't matter what color you are because we're all a color. Everyone is invited to be on this committee. So again, think about that when we're going forward. So I want to again go through the panel here one more time, say a few words, and then we will be on our way for holiday shopping. Tariana, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. Well, just again, a lot of gratitude for inviting us to this space. I guess I'll close by saying, again, there is great opportunity. Don't forget that. Be a change agent, not just a real estate agent. Think about your work, about not finding a dwelling, but a place of belonging. And, when you are in a powerful and privileged space because people are literally putting their trust in you to guide through that process. Honor that trust. Honor that trust because, again, this is not about buying a sweater.
Right.
Honor that trust because this is buying, again, belonging and community and family and love. So honor that and feel proud and take, again, the the burden that is tied to that. Take that burden seriously. And yeah, just gratitude, because I think I've been inspired by this conversation, and I've learned a lot as well.
Thank you. Nita?
I'd like to share
Parting
with the
words.
I'd like to share with the audience my very favorite book. It's called The Cathedral Within.
Oh, wow.
It's by Bill Shore. And the book is about the great cathedral builders of the world and how these guys knew the whole time they were building the great cathedrals that they probably would not see the finished product. I just think the book lines up with what we've talked about today.
That's
I
beautiful.
think we're building the great cathedral and we may not see the finished product, but let it not deter us from working hard, relentlessly, and committed to do this work. So thank you for allowing this space filled with grace today, where we could talk about really hard things in a way that was free of judgment and critique. I thank you for that. And I encourage you to keep on going. We've got a lot of work to do, and we can't do it without each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Nita. Milford?
You guys are all awesome. I love you. You can't stop me from loving you. All the people on Zoom, I love you and care about you. You can't stop me from loving you. So I just want to leave a call to action with you. I remember my baby girl when she was younger. Remember, babies always start off crawling or rolling and then they crawling, but they see us standing up straight. So if you remember, just like diversity, we may have to take some baby steps and starting off. We may have to start off crawling. Don't look at the overall picture because you'll get discouraged. But if you remember babies, they start pulling, you have a coffee table there, they will start pulling themselves up the coffee table and try to stand it. They may wobble and fall again. And I think diversity is that way. We have to build an environment where individuals that have not been treated fairly, give them an environment that they can pull themselves up. I'm not looking for a handout, I'm looking for a hand up. And I think that's as a baby, as they grow, they start standing and they start walking because there was an environment safe enough with their mom and dad that they can walk. Now they're walking. And I think diversity is like an infant child right now, that we have to build that foundation and we have to learn how to allow that foundation to pull itself up. Be a support system for people that don't look like yourself. Go out and introduce yourself to your neighbors and start there, your fear of influence and your family, and rebuild some of those relationships that you thought was broken. All of that is allowing us as an organization, as a family, as a nation, because we are a reflection of our nation. We have to own that. If we don't like what we see, let's change what we're giving. Thank you.
Thank you. What a blessing and an honor to be present for this moment with each and every one of you. Like I say, I learned a lot and continue to grow. And I also want to thank those who attended today, who took the time out of their busy days and sat down and just listened to the discussion and added some great questions. Again, it was an honor to be here, and I hope that we'll do this again in the coming year, and maybe we'll be able to actually be with each other and hug each other at the end and know that we're all part of the same family. So again, thank you so much. It was an honor, and have a happy holiday season by all means. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye-bye.